Daoud 1 by Phillip Keller. The steps of a good man are ordered by Yahuwah, and he delights in his way. Though he fall, he shall not be utterly cast down, for Yahuwah upholds him with his hand. From Psalm 37, 23 through 24. Written by King Daoud. About this book. The life of Daoud, Yasharel's second king, holds enormous fascination for people everywhere. Somehow, he attracts the attention of both believers and non-believers. There is a certain charisma about his character that commands the interest of both adults and children. His exploits and daring are woven into the colorful tapestry of a brilliant career. So it is not surprising that scholars, historians, writers, painters, and film producers have directed their time and skill to Daoud. Perhaps this explains why during the past 5 years, 3 different publishers have urged me to do a study of his life. Because the biblical record concerning this man is so extensive, at first I considered this assignment almost too formidable. Finally, it was decided the work should be done in stages, embracing more than one volume. This book is the first of those works. Customarily, my main thrust in dealing with a biblical character is to discover the purposes of Yahuwah in the record. Why did the Almighty choose and use this person to achieve his ends in the earth scene? What were the inspired principles at work in this life used to lift an individual to notoriety above his people? Are there spiritual lessons we can learn from him? This book is not just a historical narrative of Daoud's life, nor is it intended to be a somber, scholarly exposition of his exploits. Rather, it is a devotional study of what the Almighty can do with a man who, though terribly tough and passionate, has a purpose to do Yah's will. As with my previous books on Yahusha, Gideon, and Eliah, the emphasis lies upon the personal response of this person's spiritual ruach to Yahuwah. Herein lies the secret to the subsequent success or failure of that individual to walk with Yahuwah in supernatural ways. Put it in terms of the New Testament, we are told plainly that all these came upon them as examples, and they were written as a warning to us, on whom the ends of the ages have come. From 1 Corinthians 10:11. It is inevitable, of course, that in depicting the life of Daoud, one must deal also with the other leading characters of his time. He must be seen in blazing contrast with Shaul, Yasharel's first awful king. We must understand his friendship with Jonathan, the first prince in Yasharel. The part played by women in his life is extraordinary. His interaction with the men under his command is fascinating. His respect for the prophets and priests of the Most High startles us. Most important, Daoud's devotion to Yahuwah touches us deeply. As an author, I have sought carefully to include in this work only that which Yah's merciful Ruach intended. Every effort has been made to set the stage and follow the scriptural record as accurately as possible. All of the material in this work was first used in active scripture study sessions with eager people anxious to discover fresh truth from Yah's word. So this book is not a theological treatise compiled in an ivory tower environment. Rather, it has emerged from months and months of study, prayer, meditation, and active interaction with groups of keen believers. It bears the dynamic thrust of real-life situations in which most of us can find personal identification. Shaul, Daoud, and Jonathan are not plastic characters separate from our humanity. They are blood and bone and breath with our same inner struggles of ruach and soul. It has moved me deeply to see and sense the profound impact these studies have made on the lives of those who came to the classes. Men and women have met the living Elohim in fresh and wondrous ways, as we saw him at work in the days of Daoud. The same truth so powerful then has not altered. It transcends time, cultures, and human personalities. The same Yahuwah Almighty stands ready today to do his own profound work in the lives of his people. May this book be used to produce great characters of shining worth for his reputation and pleasure. Chapter 1. Yasharal demands a king, from 1 Samuel 8 and 9. 380 years had passed since the exciting night of Yasharel's exodus from Egypt. In power and moving majesty, Yahuwah had delivered his own peculiar chosen people of the agreement out of slavery to the pharaohs. With a mighty hand, he had moved them across the Reed Sea and into the desert shadows of Sinai. Under the guidance of the magnificent men like Moshe and Yahusha, Yasharel had traversed the wilderness, crossed the flooding Jordan, and settled in Canaan. There they drove out the Amorites and partitioned Palestine for their own permanent homeland. It was Yahuwah's clear intention that Yasharel should be an unusual human society. They were to be neither a democracy nor a monarchy, but a theocracy, in which he himself was paramount. For spiritual leadership, Yasharel would look to the priests drawn from the tribe of Luai. For civil jurisdiction, they would be led by judges. For 340 dismal years after the death of the illustrious Yahusha, Yasharel stumbled and staggered under various leaders, some good, others deplorable. Invaded frequently by their old enemies, plundered and oppressed by their neighboring nations, the people of Yasharel became rebellious and discontented with Yahuwah's heavenly arrangement for their government. Finally, in grim determination to make a change, the people came to Shemuel demanding a king. The aged judge, also considered a prophet of the Most High, was aghast at Yasharel's audacity. Never before had this peculiar people shown such a determination to have a monarch of their own. At any cost, they would establish a royal family to lead them. In part, this violent action was triggered by Shemuel's own wayward sons. He had appointed them as judges to succeed him, but their propensity to corruption and their perversion of justice enraged the people. So they insisted on a king. In deep remorse, Shemuel sought the counsel of Yahuwah. The reassurance which came to the dear old veteran was that Yasharel was not rejecting him, but rather rejecting the government of Yahuwah. Shemuel was to warn them of their folly, yet accede to their wishes. It was a crucial turning point in Yasharel's tragic history. It was the hinge upon which all of her future would turn for the next 370 years. It was the precise midway point between the exodus from Egypt with its slavery back into abysmal bondage to the Babylonians. In moving entreaty, Shemuel warned his people of the perilous path they were choosing. Contrary to Yahuwah's will, he described in vivid detail the error of tyranny that would overtake them under the king of their choice. They would cry out in anguish because of his abuse. Shemuel's warnings were of no avail. Instead, Yasharel demanded even more vehemently that they be given a king who would rule their territory and fight their battles. In this way, they were sure they could become an equal force against their adversaries. What Yasharel had done as a nation, the great majority of us do as individuals. We insist on having our own way. We adamantly exercise our own wills in rejecting the government of Yahuwah in our own lives. We are determined to control our own conduct. We choose to be kings in our own careers. We blatantly reject the king of esteem and refuse to submit to the sovereignty of his merciful Ruach. This is a most dangerous course of action. The results of our rebellion can be devastating. Yet Yahuwah, very Yahuwah, rather than override our wills, grants us with what we insist upon. Often, the consequences are catastrophic for us and grievous to him. This was to be the case for Yasharel in the choice of Shaul as their first king. A man of magnificent physique and impressive appearance, Shaul was selected for his sheer physical strength. Combined with his handsome features was a formidable will, strong as steel. This becomes quickly apparent when he sets out to search for the asses that strayed from his father's herd. Shaul was not content merely to look around the neighbors' pastures for the missing animals. No, indeed, he and his servant tramped close to 100 miles across the rocky ranges of the surrounding territory, determined to find the donkeys. Nor was this enough. If necessary, he would even seek out Shemuel and consult with the veteran seer to obtain heavenly inspired direction in his search. Quite obviously, he had never seen Shemuel before, never felt any of his spiritual advice. But when it came to donkeys, nothing would deter him. He would pay solid silver for the prophet's services. When the two men met Shemuel, he was unknown to them. The grizzled old man of Yahuwah had to identify himself to the spiritually dull young men. And no doubt, when the prophet pronounced that Shaul was to be Yasharel's new monarch, the news was a bit more than he could manage to grasp. After all, asses were the younger man's foremost interest in life just now. And who wanted to be king over his countrymen when he would be much more contented caring for donkeys? Shemuel hastened to assure the handsome young Hercules towering over him that in fact his asses had been found. The venerable old prophet urged Shaul to set aside all further concern for the donkeys. Instead, he entreated him to take seriously the new honors and responsibilities his role as king would embrace, especially a monarch in Yasharel. Rather lamely and somewhat shamefully, Shaul protested that he came from the smallest tribe in Yasharel, Benjamin. He pointed out that his family was not prominent, but rather the least in his community. Why then should he be chosen? He had hoped this would be a convenient excuse to sidestep the role of a sovereign to which Yahuwah was calling him. But Shemuel, the venerable prophet, was persistent. He was determined to prepare the young man towering above him for the task of leading his obdurate nation. Brushing aside all of Shaul's objections, he took him and his servant into the midst of the gathering of local people and placed him in the most honored place at the banquet table. With a stroke of enormous significance to all assembled, Shemuel commanded that the choicest cut of the shoulder portion be set before Shaul. At once, everyone assembled knew the powerful import of this action. This shoulder roast was the special heave offering of sacrifice restricted for and dedicated to the lofty service of the priesthood. It was the portion that denoted the role of those chosen of Yahuwah to guide his people in spiritual matters. Read carefully Exodus 29:22 through 28. In profound symbolic language, Shemuel was conveying to Shaul the intent that as a chosen king, he was responsible to rule Yasharel in a spiritual dimension. It was not enough that Yasharel's leaders be merely judicial monarchs. They were also required to be spiritual shepherds, so to speak. To emphasize this aspect, Shemuel addressed the somewhat shaken young stalwart with this stern command: "See, what was kept back? It was set aside for you." From 1 Shemuel 9:24. In solemn, lofty ritual, the handsome young man from an obscure little family in Benjamin partook of a priestly feast with the most honored prophet in Yasharel. It was a moving event, a special moment. Its spiritual significance far outweighed its symbolism. For in truth, the great seer of the Most High had skillfully brought Shaul to a great divide in his walk with Yahuwah. In two swift, stabbing statements, he had placed before the determined young man a lifelong choice. The first, do not set your heart on them, for they have been found, from verse 20, was a challenge to turn from his old interest, his preoccupation with his personal possessions, his familiar pursuits. The second, set before you the sacrifice of service and the spiritual interest of eternal worth. From 1 Samuel 10:8, was a call to heavenly duties. Shaul now stood challenged in spirit and ruach to either serve himself or to serve Yahuwah as a special servant king. It was a poignant point in his career. Later events clearly indicated that he opted to serve himself. For when eventually he returned home after being with Shemuel, the first to meet him was his uncle. On inquiring what had transpired, Shaul reported only that he had searched for the donkeys, which Shemuel assured him had been found. Obviously, asses still occupied prior place in the young man's interest. He had a mind set for the beast. Eventually, he would make an absolute ass of himself because of this refusal to refocus his affection on the things of Yahuwah. Even on the crowning occasion, when Shemuel was to set him before Yasharel as their demanded monarch, Shaul could not be found. Finally, he was discovered hiding himself amongst the saddles and gear of his beloved beast, in his calamitous choice of donkeys above heavenly rulership over Yasharel. Shaul, at the outset of his reign, had ruled against the government of Yahuwah. He was determined to have his own way, to do his own thing, to serve himself. We who look askance at this tragic series of events may marvel that a man could be so stubborn. Who would settle for being a donkey driver when he could be a monarch of the Most High? Yet each of us is faced at some point in life with a similar choice. The Spirit, Ruach of the Almighty, calls each of us away from our self-centered preoccupations to serve as priests and kings to Yahuwah. From Revelation 5:9-10. But sorrow upon sorrow, both to ourselves, to Yahusha, and to others. Like Shaul, most of us prefer to do our own thing in life, to please ourselves rather than Yahuwah. Chapter 2. Shaul's preparation for kingship, from 1 Samuel 9:10. When Yasharel demanded a king from Yahuwah, Shemuel knew full well the nation was putting itself in serious jeopardy. But when the man chosen was Shaul from Geba, the prophet's spiritual concern was even more accurate. The town of Geba in the tiny tribe of Benjamin bore a dreadful stigma in the history of Yasharel. Shaul had been painfully honest when he showed amazement that anyone from his tribe and his ill-reputed community would be selected as the first monarch. He had every reason to be aghast. Gibeah is the town where the man from Ephraim, unnamed in Scripture, stopped overnight with his young concubine from Bethlehem. They were invited into an old man's home as strangers. Later, some local ruffians, a band of homosexuals, beat on the door, demanding the visitor be brought out so they could engage in sexual perversion with him. Instead of submitting to these vile demands, the visitor pushed his beautiful young concubine out the door into the darkness. Like a pack of ravening predators, the perverts rushed upon the poor girl, raping and abusing her in animal acts until dawn. At break of day, she lay dead upon the doorstep, a victim of their brutal behavior. In outrage, the man from Ephraim bore her mangled, bloody body home. He dismembered it in 12 pieces. Each of the 12 terrible portions was sent to a tribe in Yasharel, with a note demanding whether such appalling deeds should be permitted among the people. The action galvanized the entire nation into action. Yasharel's men of war went into repeated battle against Benjamin until the final death toll was some 40,000 Yasharelites fallen and no fewer than 25,100 Benjamites. So drastic was the destruction that eventually only a tiny handful of several hundred men survived in Benjamin. It was a virtual genocide for Yasharel, but it revealed boldly the terrible consequences of sexual aberrations in a human society. Read Judges 19 through 21. Those of the 20th century who are inclined to dismiss lightly the increasing influence of the gay community need to reflect on this event. It reveals the awesome peril in which a sexually perverted people stands before Yahuwah. Because of such a background, Shemuel took it upon himself to interest young Shaul in spiritual matters. The next dawn, after the day in which the two had shared the feast of the heave offering, Shemuel would send him home on his way. But before that, the prophet took the youth to the top of his house, and there, in the privacy of the sun deck, shared spiritual truth with him. For hours, Shemuel gave the towering giant complete details of what his duties would be, both before Yahuwah and man. After all, Shaul was to be his successor. Shemuel was the last of the long retinue of judges in Yasharel. He had years and years of experience in leading this obdurate nation. It was the sum total of all his wisdom, knowledge, and spiritual insights which he passed on to Shaul that memorable day. Shaul knew full well that no mortal man, in his own human limitations, could lead a difficult nation like Yasharel aright. He would need supernatural guidance of the Almighty. He would need heavenly direction from Yahuwah's merciful spirit and Ruach. He would need a special endowment for the spiritual as well as judicial service to his people. Shaul was not, to this point, a man suited to such lofty duties. A magnificent physique, a handsome appearance, perhaps charisma of personality, even a strong and determined will are not sufficient credentials to be chosen as a leader. There must be the sterling qualities of spiritual understanding, a sensitivity to the guidance of Yahuwah's spirit and Ruach, a profound respect for the lofty laws of Yahuwah, a deep desire, above all else, to do his will. As Yahusha had demonstrated so brilliantly 300 years before, it was implicit faith in Yahuwah and immediate compliance with his commands that guaranteed right government and startling success for a nation. It remained to be seen if Shaul could do the same. At dawn the next day, Shemuel emphasized again the enormous importance for Shaul to hear and respond positively to the word of Yahuwah. Yahuwah's law should be the law of his life. Shemuel led Shaul outside the town to send him on his way. Before parting, the prophet drew a small vial of oil from the folds of his robe. In solemn obedience to the command of Yahuwah, he anointed Shaul to be king over his people. Then he bestowed on him a kiss of honor and respect. Shemuel advised the young monarch that as he traveled home to Gibeah, several significant events would occur. First, he would meet two men who would clearly confirm to him that his father's asses had been found and that now his father was searching for him. Secondly, he would meet other strangers bearing kids, bread, and wine. See 1 Shemuel 10:3. They would share their bread with him. This was significant, since when he came to Shemuel, he had no bread at all to bestow upon the prophet. The bread was indicative of much more than merely barley loaves. It spoke profoundly of spiritual truth and clear comprehension of Yahuwah's commands. In this area, Shaul was truly destitute, as later events in his life would demonstrate. He needed spiritual bread, as surely as he now was given temporal bread to share with others. Most significant, on his way home, he would meet a band of young prophets, praising and making music to Yahuwah. In their company, the spirit of Yahuwah would come upon him, and he too would prophesy. Shemuel looked at the handsome king standing so tall and straight before him. With piercing gaze and quiet voice, he made the heart-stirring pronouncement, "You will be turned or changed into another man." See 1 Shemuel 10:6. The wise old seer knew, and Yahuwah's Ruach knew it would take the very life of the living Elohim active in this young donkey driver to make him fit for royal service to his people. There simply had to be a profound change in his character if he was to be a mighty monarch amongst men. All his life, Shemuel had served Yasharel as a noble judge. He had a remarkable record of fine achievements, both before Yahuwah and men. The secret of his success had always been his implicit submission to the guidance of Yahuwah's Spirit, coupled with prompt obedience to the word of Yahuwah. What had been true for him had likewise been true for Yasharel's chosen leaders of outstanding merit. Men like Moshe, Yahusha, and Gideon were great, not in their own might or skill, but in their total allegiance to Yahuwah. They were magnificent in their day because of their willingness to do Yahuwah's will at any cost. They were totally expendable for Yahuwah. So now Shemuel pressed upon Shaul the absolute imperative of doing whatever Yahuwah commanded. "Yahuwah is with you," the prophet assured him. "Yahuwah is here. Yahuwah is present. Simply carry out his commands." See 1 Shemuel 10:7. It was a declaration of enormous importance. The very first test of whether or not Shaul took this charge seriously would be 7 days later when the two men would meet again at Gilgal. The prophet's direct word to him was that he was to wait there for his arrival. Shaul took leave of Shemuel. Almost instantaneously, the spirit and ruach of Yahuwah moved upon him as foretold. He was endued with the ability to prophesy. This special capacity was not only to speak of the future, but also to clearly converse of Yahuwah's purpose for his people. The sudden transformation attracted immediate public attention. Those who knew Shaul well could scarcely believe the change that had come over him. In astonishment, they asked, "Is Shaul also among the prophets?" See verse 11. They could scarcely credit the fact that a man like Kish, whose name means a snare, could produce a son of such spiritual stature. In fact, the entire episode became a byword in the region. With startling speed, the word of Shaul's metamorphosis sped across the country. On the surface, at least, it would seem that Yasharel would be revered not only with a handsome monarch in physical majesty, but also honored with a royal king of profound spiritual power. All the outward signs seemed so reassuring. Surely, Shaul would become a national hero. The first inkling that Yasharel's initial choice of a king was faulty came almost immediately. For when Shaul encountered his uncle, the first of his family to meet him after being absent so long, he was asked a very simple question. "Where did you go?" See verse 14. Shaul's abrupt and offhand reply that he and his servant had merely gone in search of the missing asses and sought Shemuel's aid in locating them was a clear signal that his priorities were in total disarray. Asses still occupied first place in his thinking. His soul was set on donkeys. He mentioned not a word of all the profound and mighty spiritual issues Shemuel had discussed with him in such moving conversations. The things of Yahuwah, it seems, carried little or no weight, with the tough-willed young worldling. The spiritual transformations were not worth mentioning. Ultimately, this selfish, self-centered mindset would be Shaul's total undoing. It would bring him to utter ruin. It would spell his eventual rejection by Yahuwah as king. It would demand that a replacement be found in Daud as one fit to fill the role of a royal sovereign over Yasharel. We who read the record of Shaul's response to Yahuwah may, if we are spiritually perceptive, see reflected in his conduct our own characters. We are startled to see in his intransigence our own behavior mirrored clearly. Many of us who claim boldly to be born from above, to be filled with Yahuwah's Ruach, to be new creatures in Yahusha, still do not have our priorities in proper order. Too often, far too often, our asses, our pursuits, our passions, our pleasures, our possessions are much more important to us than anything Yahuwah ever did in our lives. Chapter 3. Yashriel receives a king. From 1 Samuel, chapter 10, 17 through 27, and chapter 11. Under the intimate direction of Yahuwah, Shemuel had decided that the day had come when Yasharel as a nation should receive her first monarch. As intimidated earlier, this was not Yahuwah's highest or best intention for this difficult people. Rather, it was their own insistent demand, to which he accepted. The grisly old prophet, gray and stooped after long years of service to his people, summoned them all to assemble at Mizpah. An electric sort of excitement crackled through the massed crowd. Who would be chosen as their new sovereign? From which tribe, community, and family would he emerge? A brand new dynasty was being established in Yasharel. What sort of person would be selected? Solemnly, in great thundering statements, Shemuel again reminded his compatriots of the serious step they were taking. Speaking on behalf of the Most High Yahuwah, he reasserted, "I delivered you from all of your oppressors. Yet this day you have rejected your Yahuwah, who saved you out of all tribulations. You have demanded to have a king set over you." See 1 Samuel 10, 18 through 19. The drastic decision was theirs. What they insisted upon, they would receive. They would have human royalty rather than heavenly royalty. They would have to endure the awful consequences. Tribe by tribe, clan by clan, and their assembled thousands, each integral group of people was ordered to present itself in honor before Yahuwah. This was a ritual of submission to the supreme sovereignty of Shemuel. The high priest was here enacting his final great role in spiritual authority over Yasharel. Using the inspired unction of the Urim and the Thummim for supernatural guidance, he meticulously inspected each tribe and clan as they stood at attention before him. The choice fell upon the little band from Benjamin. Then, in turn, the family clan of Matri and Kish was selected, and from them Shaul was drawn by name. It was an orderly, accepted process familiar to this strange people. Yahusha had used this method to determine long ago that Achan had disobeyed Yahuwah and brought terrible defeat on Yasharel at the Battle of Ai. It was the method used by Yahusha under the high priest Eleazar to divide and apportion all of Palestine to the nation of Yasharel. On this momentous day in Yasharel's tragic history, it was the ordained way in which Shaul was chosen as a king in the presence of all his people. Only one thing was awry. Shaul himself could not be found. He had gone into hiding. Perhaps the very prospect of ruling such a perverse people overwhelmed the young giant. Or it was his own personal reluctance to serve others that made him hide. Perhaps his penchant for donkeys and livestock was an all-consuming passion. For when at last he was discovered, by means of guidance from Yahuwah, Shaul was found buried beneath the saddle blankets, panniers, and usual array of baggage borne by the sturdy little beast. It was an absurd act. If it had not been so sad, it might as well have been ludicrous and laughable. There Shaul stood, towering well over 6 feet, head and shoulders above the massed crowd, crushing in all around him. No doubt strands of straw and wisp of hay clung to his clothes and stuck to his handsome head of hair. Dust and dirt soiled his robes. He had just been rolled out from beneath the smelly, sweat-stained saddle blankets of his beloved donkeys. He looked like anything but a monarch. Without apology or delay, Shemuel simply stood the young giant up before all the nation and stated, "See the one whom Yahuwah has chosen? There is no other like him amongst the people." From verse 24. In a roaring thunder of mounting applause, all the crowd shouted in unison, "Yahuwah, save the king!" How little they realized, in this moment of emotion, that it was they who would need to be saved from the tyranny of such a disastrous ruler. We're not told this, but without doubt in that mass multitude stood a man named Yesse, a sturdy sheepman from Yehuda. Looking at Shaul, he must have mused to himself, "What an honor to be a father like Kish to be a king in Yasharel." Little did he dream that one day his own son Daoud would be chosen of Yahuwah to supplant the magnificent man now standing as monarch over Yasharel. Time changed many things. The people dispersed quickly from Mizpah, returning to their homes, towns, and rural hamlets. All would be well now for Yasharel. She had her king. No need to be concerned about invasions or conquest by enemy invaders. Shaul would save the nation. Unhappily for Shaul, not everyone in Yasharel adored him. A certain group of young stalwarts, whose ruach Yahuwah had touched, turning their wills to serve him, had gathered their forces around Shaul. But by the same measure, there were those who despised his kingship, doubting if indeed he could deliver Yasharel in its hour of danger. It was a difficult position for the young monarch. Happily, he was wise enough to ignore the insults. In a short time, his power in battle would become known to the nation. His actions would speak louder than any words he might utter in self-defense. There are those who assert that Shaul's behavior at the beginning of his reign indicated a man humble in spirit, self-effacing and contrite in heart. In part, this may have been true, but from the perspective of later events, especially his attitude and actions against Jonathan, his own son, Daoud, who was to succeed him, and others, it is apparent Shaul was already showing the early signs of a decided schizophrenia. Just at this juncture in the history of Yasharel, the Ammonites, an offshoot of the nation originating with Lot's youngest daughter, threatened to invade Yabesh Gilead across the Jordan. Not only did they wish to enslave them, but, even much more deplorable, they intended to bore out their right eyes as an insult to Yasharel. The elders of Yabesh begged for a week's reprieve. They would seek help from Yasharel. If none was forthcoming, they would submit to the invaders, suffering their awful cruelty. It was natural that their plight be made known first to Shaul's little town of Gibeah. Yabesh hoped he would come to their rescue. But beyond this, there were the ancient intimate ties between Yabesh and Benjamin. When Yasharel annihilated all the men and women of Benjamin, except a few hundred warriors, They had gone to Yabesh Gilgad to procure young virgin brides for the few warriors. So Shaul's own lineage traced back to Yabesh. The news of the impending invasion threw Gibeah into a panic. The villagers burst into tears. It seemed all was lost. But it was not. Yahuwah had his man of the hour in Gibeah, reprehensible as its past record may have been. Shaul came home that evening driving his beloved donkeys from their range. He found the community in an uproar of anguish and inquired for the cause of commotion and weeping. The news enraged him. The spirit of Yahuwah, given to him in such plenitude for service, now stirred in him deeply. In a bold action, vividly reminiscent of the man from Ephraim, whose concubine had been cut into pieces and sent to each tribe in Yasharel, Shaul now slaughtered a pair of his own oxen. Severing them into small pieces, he sent portions of the bloody flesh to every tribe in the nation. A solemn warning accompanied the grisly messages. Come out to battle for Shaul and Shemuel, or your own oxen will be slaughtered in this way. See 1 Shemuel 11:8. It was the first royal edict issued by Yasharel's fledgling monarch. To a man, the entire nation responded, most of them awed by Shaul's bold action. In a matter of hours, a force of nearly 1/3 men were mustered for war. Some 300,000 came from the tribes of Yasharel and 30,000 from Yehuda. Shaul, with enormous self-confidence, sent word back to Yabesh Gilgad that aid would come to them by noon the next day. Elated, the messengers raced home with the news. With remarkable skill and speed, Shaul divided his huge army into 3 divisions. Immediately they were dispatched against the Ammonites. All this was achieved under the cover of darkness. The Yashreelites went into action during the dawn of the morning watch, from 2 to 6 a.m., taking the enemy by surprise. The rout was so complete and the victory so overwhelming that by noon the invaders were scattered as dust before the wind. It was a tremendous triumph for Shaul. Those loyal to him from the outset now demanded the death of those who had depreciated his kingship. But Shaul was in an expansive mood, making no move to wreak vengeance on his detractors. Instead, in a rare and generous outburst of gratitude to Yahuwah, he shouted, "Today Yahuwah has saved Yasharel." See 1 Shemuel 11:13. This was perhaps the most noble thing Shaul ever did in all his life. It seemed like such an auspicious omen of great hope for Yasharel's future. Caught up in the excitement of the great victory, Shemuel decided on the spot it would be in order for Yasharel to celebrate with a second coronation of her new king. He could hardly be blamed for this. After all, the first occasion at Mizpah had been such a dreadful debacle. At Shemuel's urging, all of Yasharel again gathered in a huge assembly at Gilgal. Gilgal means where the reproach is removed. Surely again, the shaky, stumbling start of Yasharel's sovereignty as a new nation was now behind them. Their magnificent monarch had established his credentials as a legitimate leader. Now was the hour to celebrate the exhilarating occasion with singing, dancing, and suitable sacrifices of peace and praise to the Most High. This is probably the only case in human history when a would-be king received the dubious honor of a double coronation. But Shaul was a double-minded man, whose character demanded much from others. Chapter 4. Receiving Heaven's Royalty. From Yohanan 1:1-14. In very truth and in actual fact, Yasharel now had received her own chosen human royalty. Shaul was firmly established as monarch in the realm. A new line of kings had come in to govern the nation. In essence, the kingdom of Yahuwah's own chosen people had been torn from his own great hands and given over to the fickle fortunes of human hands. In a word, Yashriel had rejected heaven's royalty and chosen a mere man as monarch instead. It was a disastrous decision of tremendous peril, and but for the generous mercy of Yahuwah himself, it would have spelled the nation's total destruction. Actually, in due course, this did occur. When Yasharel was overcome by her oppressors, taken back into bondage, then eventually scattered like barley chaff to the four winds of the world. The importance of this choice cannot be narrated in a book of this kind, only as an ominous historical event. For it is much more than that. It is a profound spiritual principle that engages every person who comes into contact with the living Elohim. It is the most crucial issue by far that faces any individual who enters the family of Yahuwah, who comes to Yahusha, who, by his Ruach, is made aware of the sovereignty of the Almighty. Our Messiah Yahusha, when he was here, spoke more about the kingdom of Yahuwah than any other subject. It was foremost in his attention. Is it in ours? Do we understand it? What does it mean to receive Yahusha as heaven's royalty? In recent human history, there has been a general worldwide revolt against monarchies. In North America, for instance, the so-called American Revolution against King George III of Britain and the less drastic action of Canada in repatriating its own constitution are examples of our break with the restraints of royalty. In the minds of many, through the teaching of history, the rule of a king has been equated with that which was tyrannical and aggressive. Subconsciously, many associate royalty with repression. Therefore, it is not surprising that people in contemporary society tend to reject the concept of coming under control of a king. Quite the opposite. We often pride ourselves upon our democratic ideals. We rejoice in our freedoms, even though often abused and misused for selfish ends. We insist all men should be free to determine their destiny in any way they choose. The result is that in truth, many of us are caught up in a conflict of ideas within. On the one hand, our secular education convinces us that royalty and the rule of a sovereign are something archaic. Yet, on the other hand, the teaching of Scripture is that the only true spiritual freedom available to a being is to come under the control of Yahusha, the King of Esteem, the Prince of Peace, the Sovereign of the universe. The single truth is that just as Yashrael rejected the royalty of the Most High in selecting Shaul's rule, so do we today in our private lives. So the hard and searching questions must be asked. Is Yahuwah in Yahusha entitled to rule over the human race? Does Yahuwah really have the credentials to command our loyal allegiance? Is he truly sovereign of our universe? If we look to human philosophy and man's politics for the answers, the reply would be a resounding no. For the inherent pride of the human will is to declare with incredible vehemence, I am king in my own castle. Yet the amazing declaration of Yahuwah's word to us as a human race is that he, and he alone, is our rightful royalty. The special revelation of the scriptures is the remarkable disclosure that our Yahuwah has certain inalienable claims upon us as his people, as his citizens, as his loyal, loving servants. These are based upon three major propositions, which, in the main, are rejected by human philosophy and scorned by science. Because these propositions are despised by modern thought, many believers try to come to some sort of comfortable accommodation with respect to the ultimate rule of heaven's royalty within their lives. They seek simply to shunt the idea to the side. If we are to enter the kingdom of Yahuwah, if we are to become children of the Most High, that cannot be done. Here are the three foundational facts which underlie Yahusha's legitimate claims upon us as a benevolent monarch. 1. He is the one who made us. It is he who, in the grandeur of his own designs, in the eternal realm, first conceived of a human race with the capacity to know him, to commune with him, to love him, to enjoy him. Not only did he desire to have a race of humans upon whom he could lavish his love, but he also wanted to bring profound pleasure to him by their response to his overtures of compassion and care. He, the creator of the universe, arranged for Earth to be prepared as a suitable environment and habitat for human beings. With its sun, moon, and stars, it was to be a stimulating setting of enormous benefit to man's body and incredible inspiration to man's being. A sphere wherein the spirit and ruach of the living Yahuwah could move in majesty upon the spirit and ruach of man. But many of our scientists, psychologists, and educators, our so-called thinkers, reject all the above. They insist human beings are but the ultimate end product of the blind evolutionary process. They contend we came into being by pure chance. They assert man is only a dual being with body and mind. They claim the realm of the spirit and ruach is but a figment of fantasy. Still, the irrefutable fact remains that deep down in his innermost instincts, man, if he's utterly honest, realizes he is far too remarkable a creature to have appeared without a creator. It is beyond all the bounds of probability. Our profound yearnings of spirit and ruach to know Yahuwah, our eternal quest for truth, our longings for hope beyond death, our ceaseless search for rest and peace, which comes only from him, attests to the fact he made us for himself. So his claim upon us as supreme creator is unshakable. Second, the second tremendous revelation given to us by Yahuwah himself is that he sustains the entire universe by the energy of his own person. He controls the heavens. He and he alone maintains the meticulous laws, principles, and power that govern the earth, as well as all of creation. Were it not for him at work everywhere, the result would be horrendous chaos, not only in the heavens, but also in the biota. Everywhere we turn to search for new knowledge. We are astonished at the order, the harmony, the deliberate designs, the incredible intricacy that governs the realm of physics, chemistry, biology, botany, or 100 other disciplines. In other words, we live in a realm of remarkable law and order. It is established in profound wisdom and love. We are the recipients of remarkable benefits we did not design. We are supported and sustained by an environment beautiful in conception, magnificent in its capacity to sustain us as people, together with all the other multitudes of life forms on the earth. In short, it may be said, in all truth, in him we live and move and have our being. From Acts 17:28. Daud, the shepherd king, who was to succeed Shaul, wrote scores of poems and psalms to attest to this fact. He, more than Shaul ever knew, recognized the royal might and majesty of the living Elohim in the universe. And it is appropriate to state here that it was Dawood's willingness to submit to the supremacy of Yahuwah's spirit and Ruach that ensured him a greatness surpassing anything Shaul would ever experience. 3. The third great self-disclosure given to us mortals by Yahuwah is that he has a legitimate claim upon us in a spiritual dimension. All of us in ignorance, folly, and incredible pride tend to stray from him. We prefer to go our own way in powerful choices of perverse self-assertion. Our surging self-will, as with Yasharel of old, prefers to reject the government of Yahuwah. We do not want to be subject to his sovereignty, even though he is so benevolent and has only our best interest in mind. The consequence has meant never-ending suffering for him and never-ending pain for us. It is he who has taken the tremendous steps necessary to deliver us from our dilemma. Out of our despair, he brings us into hope. Out of our spiritual death, he brings us into life. Out of our dreadful darkness, he brings us into the light of his own wondrous presence. This is the great news of his coming to us. It is the stirring salvation given to us so generously through his perfect life, his merciful death, and his thrilling resurrection. He is the one who redeems us. He restores us if we will let him to himself. He heals the breach between us. He claims us as his own children. He, who is heaven's royalty, has done all that is necessary to free us from slavery to sin and servitude to Satan, submissive to the terrible tyranny of our own selfishness. He offers us total freedom to become his loyal, loving subjects. A formidable question which all of us here face is this: as heaven's royalty, will I receive him as king? Unfortunately, most do not. The reason is twofold. First, many are taught that to receive Yahusha is the same as receiving a gift. One just reaches out to take and possess it. Not so with a royal monarch. To receive a royal personage implies exactly the opposite. It means the recipient presents himself to the monarch to be owned and possessed by royalty. It is to declare one's total devotion and loyalty to his sovereign. Few of us ever submit ourselves in this way to the merciful government of Yahuwah. We will not submit to the sovereignty of his spirit and Ruach. We will not come under the benevolent control of the living Messiah, Yahusha, King of heaven and earth. The second reason for this is the steel-like resistance of our wills to his. We refuse to capitulate to his claims upon us. We insist on being little kings in our own castles. We are determined to make our own decisions and so seal our destiny, even if it means our ultimate destruction. This is what Yasharel did as a nation. It was the same path Shaul chose as a self-willed monarch, who came to a dreadful demise, as we shall see. But the eternal, generous offer extended to each of us is, he came unto his own, and his own received him not. But as many as received him, to them he gave the power to become the sons of Yahuwah. From Yohanan 1:11-12.